Welcome to the Real News Network. I'm Mark Steiner. Great to have you all with us. Addressing issues of race and racism are not mere topics to discuss, but are front and center in defining our body politic. And more to the point, for this conversation, define the heart of what it means to be a Democratic elected official or candidate in these elections. During the recent Democratic debates, two candidates were felled, or at least deeply wounded, because they could not adequately address how they failed in the battle for full racial equality in this country, at one level or another. Former Vice President Joe Biden would not really tackle how he opposed busing and why, and how he might have changed or didn't change, and how he allied himself with the segregation of senators from the former Confederacy. Or more to the point, for this conversation, South Bend Mayor Pete Buttigieg, despite his contrition on stage, could not justify his inaction in addressing the needs of his city's black community, or the death of a young black man at the hands of the police, or why so few police officers are black in his city. Jeet, national correspondent for The Nation, who wrote about all this in an article for that magazine, and is also author of Love with Art, Francois Mouly's Adventures in Comics with Art Spiegelman, and Sweet Lechery, reviews, essays, and profiles. I love the name of that book. Joins us to parse through it. And Jeet, welcome. Good to have you with us.
It's good to be back.
So Jeet, let's begin with this clip from the debate. This is where Pete Buttigieg is being questioned by Rachel Maddow and his response.
The police force in South Bend is now 6% black in a city that is 26% black. Why has that not improved over your 2 terms as mayor?
Because I couldn't get it done. And I could walk you through all of the things that we have done as a community, all of the steps that we took from bias training to de-escalation, but it didn't save the life of Eric Logan. And when I look into his mother's eyes, I have to face the fact that nothing that I say will bring him back.
I mean, unlike Biden, at least he was contrite and was trying to say, I screwed up, and couldn't get it done.
Yeah.
Right?
No, I think the contriteness was a very human moment and was very welcome. But I think that as a whole, his answer was very inadequate, because I don't think he is acknowledged or is even aware of the depth of his failure. He said he tried and it didn't work. Well, actually, the percentage and number of African-American cops in his city that he's mayor of has gone down dramatically since he's been a mayor, and they've had huge issues. Starting with one of his first acts as mayor was the firing of a black police chief who had conflict with cops that he said were making racist comments. Also, Mayor Pete, his big selling point is that he's the mayor of this, Rust Belt city that's very diverse, and he's made it grow. But, if you actually talk to the African-American citizens of that town, they tell another story. And I don't think anything he said on that stage really comes to terms with that failure.
So, as you mentioned that, we have a clip here of his interaction that took place before this debate with African-American residents around this issue of the police killing Eric Logan and more. And so let's take a peek at this.
I just want to make sure that you are aware that we're looking for no cover-up. We want transparency, total transparency. In this case,
there needs to be more meaningful conversations with a more diverse group, because what you see tonight is that African Americans are not monolithic. We do not have the same ideas, thoughts, and opinions.
Get them off the streets! Any racist is at the damn desk. Put them at the desk, make them do paperwork.
I will say that if anyone who is on patrol is shown to be a racist or to do something racist in a way that is substantiated, that is their last day on the street.
I mean, well, let me not comment. You're the guest. You comment.
Sure. Well, I think viewers saw what was happening there. There was people who were angry, justifiably angry, and he really came across as, not able to address their anger or provide a really good answer. And one should, just for some context, there's been a lot of community concern that he hasn't done stuff that he has in his power to do. As mayor, he can appoint the board that watches over the police, and there's been a lot of pressure to make that board more responsive to African Americans, and he hasn't done that. There's a particular cop who's involved in this case who drove the man who was shot to the hospital, and he died in the car. And that cop has had a string of incidences, and there's been a lot of pressure for Buttigieg to do something about that, and he hasn't. So I think, and more broadly, Buttigieg, his staff is not very diverse, and as mayor, he's really governed as a sort of gentrifying mayor. He's done a lot of great things for the sort of middle-class whites that are moving into South Bend, whereas the more rooted African American community hasn't seen any benefits. So he really has no answer for that, and I think that's a real problem. Just on a simple level, it's a problem for him as mayor. He needs to address it. That's his job. But he's also running for president of a party, that's where a quarter of the primary voters are African American, and he's among the whitest, if not the whitest, candidate in terms of the support he has. There are many polls that show him at 1-2% among African American.
Right.
I just saw a poll where he was at like 1% among Latinos. He's under like Yang, who's like nobody considers a serious candidate. So I just think and so all his support really is among middle class professional whites. And that's a real problem. I mean, that is one part of the Democratic base. It's considered the wine track, right? And a good candidate like Obama appeals both to the wine track and it appeals to the beer track of more working class voters who are Black, Latino, and white. And this is a candidate that only appeals to wine drinkers.
And see, one of the things that is so distressing about this is if you just take Pete Buttigieg as an example, and you look at cities across the country, it's not unusual for cities not to address the question of gentrification without dislocation, without moving people away from their communities, and how you build a balance in a city. What's shocking to me is there's so many mayors and other people running these parts of their cities, whether it's Baltimore or New York or Boston or San Francisco or South Bend, haven't got it. And that's the part of the racism that is so kind of embedded systemically in the system, embedded so deeply in consciousness that people don't even realize it's there, and they're doing it. And I think that's part of what Pete Buttigieg is, a bright guy, just doesn't get.
Yeah, he's a bright guy, but he also, when he wants to address these issues, his solutions are technocratic solutions. He's a big advocate of body cameras for police, and he implemented that. And but guess what? At the shooting, the cop took off his body camera before the shooting, right?
Right.
So, if you still have, cops with questionable racial attitudes, all the body cams in the world are not going to change that. You actually have to go much more root and branch. And for whatever reason, he's unwilling to take on the power structure in the city that is, committed to having this overwhelmingly white police force. And that's a real problem. And he thinks, and the solutions he offers are gimmicks. I mean, it's okay gimmicks. It's good to have body cameras, but that's not going to solve this.
No, it's not going to solve that. And I wonder what you think in a broader sense. He's going to be covering this election pretty intensely, obviously, over the next year and a half. How this is going to play out, both in terms of the primary, but in terms of the general. I mean, the Democratic Party is obviously much more diverse than the Republican Party. This is where the majority of black voters are. And so how do you think this plays out in terms of who becomes the next candidate and what it says about what might happen in this general election coming up?
Yeah, I think that it, just on a very basic level, I think a candidate like Buttigieg really can't go forward just because his support is so overwhelmingly white. So I think that's going to be a real difficulty for him. And it's not just a matter of who he can support, but how he can position himself as a candidate. I think he just doesn't have plausibility on this issue. And so I do think that the candidates you have to have a candidate that can build a multiracial coalition. And Joe Biden, who was the other candidate who ran into problems,
right.
He actually has done that partially through longstanding ties, partially through name recognition, partially through being Obama's vice president. But he might be facing problems now as well. So I think that you have to ask who are the candidates that can do this. I think Harris might be able to do this. I think Sanders, certainly, if you look at the people who are supporting him, despite the sort of myth of the Bernie bros, Sanders actually has been doing quite well. Like about half his supporters are people of color. So I think that I think Elizabeth Warren is much better than Buttigieg, but not quite there. Like, I think she actually needs to build up some support among African Americans and Latinos. You really have to have a candidate that has a multiracial coalition, both to win the primaries and to win the election.
Right. And to be able to cross those class boundaries and within the working class itself, bringing people together instead of dividing them up. That's going to be one of the big fixes.
That's right. Yeah, no, exactly. And I think I think the race part is tied to the class part. Like, he's actually the candidate of the professional middle class, which is overwhelmingly a white class.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, Jeet, it's always a pleasure. This is great. 2 times in the last week we've talked together. We look forward a great deal more as the campaign revs up and your writing revs up for the nation. I'm looking forward to talking to you a great deal more.
Always good to talk.
All right. Take care, man. Good to have you here with us today.
Yep.
And I'm Mark Steiner here for the Real News Network. Thanks for joining us. Take care.